Hello everyone. Thanks for being here this afternoon. This is a conference that is called Imaginaries of the Dystopian in Contemporary Cuban Cinema, in Cuban Independent Cinema. I am Jose Luis Aparicio. I'm a filmmaker, but I'm here as a curator uh, of Land Without Images, The Absent in Cuban Cinema, which is INSTAR's retrospective of Cuban independent alternative cinema, nearly 100 hours of films from the last 60 years that represent an alternative vision of the country that is outside the canonical, classical, official vision imposed by the Government Official Film Institute, ICAIC, and the other rest of the propaganda of the country. And we'll be talking today with four very important contemporary Cuban filmmakers. They are all very different. They all have a very unique voice, a very unique aesthetic perspective on contemporary Cuba. But the provocation of this conference is the idea that they have all approached a dystopian vision of the country in some of their films. So I will be presenting them. Left to right, here is Carlos Quintela, the director of films like La Piscina, Swimming Pool, La Obra del Siglo, The Project of the Century, y Los Lobos del Este, The Wolves of the East. And he has shorts also, but he has these three feature films. And we will be talking especially about La Obra del Siglo, The Project of the Century, which premiered in 2015 in the International Film Festival of Rotterdam and won an important award there. And also we have here Rafael Ramírez, a Cuban avant-garde experimental filmmaker with a very unclassifiable work, very beautiful work. He has a lot of shorts like Los Perros de Amundsen Dogs, that premiered in Locarno, and Alona, Diario de la Niebla, Diary of the Mist, and his feature film Las Campañas de Invierno with the winter campaigns. Here with me also, Miguel Coyula. He has been making films in the 90s, and he is one of the most important voices in contemporary Cuban independent cinema because of because of his films like Cucarachas Rojas, Red Cucarachas, and Blue Heart, his latest film, which are very dystopian visions and also memories of overdevelopment. And Miguel has a very particular way of approaching cinema, a very particular production method that he will be talking about also. And finally, Alejandro Alonso, a Cuban documentary filmmaker with a lot of documentaries and non-fiction work that have premiered in festivals like Bichon du Réel, like Rotterdam, which also his latest feature, Terranova, who won Rotterdam 2 years ago, and a lot of the short films that are playing here, like Home, Metatron, and his feature El Proyecto, the project. So I will be like opening the debate because I want to hear from all of them, and this is like an open question for them to develop how they think their work has approached the idea of dystopia in order to talk about contemporary Cuba. Because in Cuba, to remember, we have a totalitarian country that was built as a socialist government, socialist regime that said it was building utopia for a lot of years. They were building the best society possible in the world, and they created all this propaganda, system in order to people to believe they will build in the future, they are the new men. And since the last 30 years, we have been watching the failure of that system, and these filmmakers are examining the ruins of this utopian project. And well, I think it's time to hear from them. So I will start with Carlos, especially with his film La Obra del Siglo, which he will be talking about. And I also think that's my personal view, that La Piscina, it has like a certain, I think it's a minimal dystopia in some way, because it's a movie like where the space plays a very important role, and it's a very minimal closed space, and it's a very, oppressive way to talk about what Cuba really is also. So, Carlos, you have the word.
Well, it's really loud. Well, thanks for everyone because it's really nice to talk for all of you and to be with my colleagues here. It's really it's a little bit dystopic, no, because it's not normal to meet each other, outside Cuba. So suddenly we are here, we are talking about dystopian films, or what we think about a dystopia is, and it's, well, I would love to start like this, is to warm up a little bit, and it's really nice to have all of you here, and all of you too. Well, I grew up in a dystopia, so it was impossible to not film that. I said that because in Cuba is everything about fiction. No, we grow up in a fiction, because try to build the perfect society is it's a fairy tale. It's really difficult. DDR tried to do the same, and you are very organized people, and it's also it goes in the wrong direction, at least from my point of view. And in Cuba, well, we go from the wrong direction, probably from the beginning, no, because Cuba all the time want to reach outer space, no. And why, why we have to do that? We are in a small island, we should have dreams, I don't know, dreams less bigger. No, Cuba was all the time dreaming above the shoulders of the Soviet Union, and why? It's so, well, in my films. You talk about the first two feature films. Well, in some way, yes, are dystopian, because as I said before, I grew up in a dystopian, so it's impossible to not film that. And I imagine, I think, if I think in my films, they are like geographies, no. It's like I build geographies, and then I shoot that geography with the characters, and I try to cap, I don't know, like a national feeling that is there. So it, in some way, it's, I use the dystopia to try to be near the soul of us, if we have a soul, no. If, but I don't know, I think, well, that's that's an idea that I would love to bring, and then I will continue thinking, and probably we will share more ideas. But I think right now, uh,
Yeah,
this is
because you were talking to me before about the idea that your films are like a dystopian realism, because the iconography of your film, the visuals of your film are not typically dystopian, but the way you show the relationships between the characters, the way you use the space to talk about the society, the structure of the society, the structure of the government, and how that is has influence and affects the individuals. In La Piscina is a very close space, and there is the people that is left out, the people with disabilities, the weird ones, the misfits, and it is very powerful because it is a society that says that it includes everybody. It's a society where the collective has very important, a lot of importance, and is justice for everyone, equal opportunities for everyone, and you feel in La Piscina, in swimming pool, that the failure of that, and the people being left out, and the people like the fiction, no, of everybody is included, everybody has the same rights and the same opportunities.
well, if I will try to summarize, all the ideas, because suddenly it's like a rain of ideas, no, and it's, but it's really difficult to talk about Cuba, because when we talk about Cuba, we need to split Cuba in two dimensions. We will talk about the dimension of the fiction, so we will talk about the mythology of the revolution, or we will talk about the real Cuba inside that myth and what means that. Not so it's tricky, because all the time we want to share what we think about Cuba, but it's really difficult to understand. And also it's really difficult to portray what is really it's Cuba about, because we came from an island, and as Cubans, in some way, we are like, we are a clan. So when you grow up in an island, you wait that things appears. It's like we are like a recent Japan. Japan is a millenarian. Well, it's a country that has 5,000 years. We don't. No, we don't have memory. We have 300 years of memory, 400 years. I don't know. If we killed, if we imagine, if we killed Jose Marti, if we killed, all our, the heroes, there is no more story. So I don't know. I get lost right now, but well, we are sick, and it's I try to escape from fiction all the time. And what I learned doing my film is that it's impossible to escape from fiction. Cuba is a deep fake from the beginning. So it's really nice at the same for the non-logical way of thinking is fantastic. But if you live inside that, it's really, really devastating because it's a marathon of obstacles. And it's not about jumping, life is not about jumping every day, at every hour, It's like, it's not like that. It should be different, or at least those obstacles should be a little bit less. So right now, I live in Madrid. He lives in Madrid. Probably you will live in Madrid. And a lot of Cubans live right now outside Cuba. So Cuba needs also to get it has to, well, to make films outside, because Cuba is a feeling, that dystopian feeling will be with us, we are loaded with a dystopian energy. So it's, at least from my point of view, it's really difficult to get rid of that. It's, you know you have to assume it and remix it and do something else with that. That's the material that we have. So that's what we'll do, and that's what I did before. No, and well, I think that's it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that last part you said, because it's like you learn a way to understand reality from what you learn from Cuba. That you have like a loss of innocence somehow, but because you understand the possibility of failure behind every utopian project, every big project that says that it will be the best possible society for us, and you understand the perverted aspect of that. And I also was thinking about how you, in some of these films from different filmmakers, you use like the same, sometimes the same symbols or spaces to talk about it, because la obra del siglo, the project of the century, you use the electronuclear plant project in Juragua, the project of building a nuclear power plant very similar like the one that was in Chernobyl, and the failure of this project that was never finished because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc. And also in Blue Heart by Miguel, there is a scene when the characters go also to and some of the experiments, the genetic experiments that happen in the fiction of Miguel's films, also have to do with the nuclear power plant in Juragua. It's beautiful how you are also using this similar elements of the geography of this dystopian history of contemporary Cuba is there, and you're using for different purposes. So that brings me to Miguel. I want you to talk about, you have two very I mean obvious dystopian films like Red Cockroaches and Blue Heart that are part. They are the two first installments of a trilogy. There is a third film that you probably will be making someday, or I don't know, you say. But you also have Memories of Overdevelopment that I think somehow it talks about the failure of the socialist system and the capitalist system. It's like we don't have anywhere to go because all the all these possibilities for building a society are rotten. Cuba and the United States is all the same in the end, or it shares the same essence that it doesn't really work. And it's also a rereading of the most classical film of Cuban cinema, that is Memories of Underdevelopment by Titon. So it's like a dystopian, maybe of somehow rereading of that classic. I want you to hear about how you think the dystopian is presented in your work. We also
Well,
have a video, I think, for Miguel. So
yeah,
maybe
yeah, but
they
I
can.
will signal it
Okay, okay.
later. So, but yeah, basically, I was, I think it's on. Yeah. I have been actually always fighting with realism in a way, but I think that's something that comes genetically with you, regardless of the context you were born in. I mean, I just happened to be born in Cuba, and of course, you try to make the most of the reality that surrounds you and transform it to put it in the screen. Because I think if you deal with realism, at least for me, in a very direct, matter of fact way, you lose the perspective and the distance that you gain from looking at our perspective. And in that sense, it was good for me. I had a scholarship in New York 20 years ago, and it allowed me to look at the island, back at the island with that distance. And so when I came back, the films I made, uh, I tried to keep that distance. It's like Carlos says, the obstacles are very big in Cuba. So you have to create a wall and live like a monk. I mean, to concentrate yourself on making films and renounce to live a normal life, not going out to eat in restaurants, you cook at home, you save every penny for your films. And that's the only thing that makes me sleep well at night, because there are very few things in life you can control. And for me, making films is the one thing I can have complete control, because I don't rely on investors. I just, little by little, even if it takes years, gradually it's been taking longer. My first film took 2 years. The second one took 5 years, and this last one took 10 years. Because what you lack in budget, you have to make it up with the time you dedicate to the project. So I have always filmed without permits, uh, not only in Cuba, but also I have shot in New York, in Tokyo, in Paris, in London. And it's always the same thing, because the crew is usually just two people. So since we don't have physical control of the reality, what I'm going to show you now, we're going to get to that later in a few seconds, but Blue Heart, since it's a film about human genetic engineering, which is an experiment that Fidel Castro creates to build a so-called new man that will achieve the socialist utopia in Cuba, which is ends up in failure. Otherwise, we wouldn't have drama, of course. But the film itself, it's mutated because the geographies of the space I used are heavily manipulated in post-production to achieve the images I need. So if we can play the video now, I'm going to show you the before and after of those digital manipulations, which will give you an idea on how we work. So if we can play the video now, the second video.
Chris, are you listening? Oh, okay. Oh, that's the.
Okay, if we can make it full screen. If we can start it again, because it was already started. And if we can back and start again and make it full screen. If we can go back to the beginning of the video. Uh-huh. And if you can make it full screen. Oh, okay. Okay, so anyway. Uh, Sorry? No, there's no sound. I'm going to talk over the video, but, well, basically, I'm going to go on from here because it's hard to get it to start again. But this next shot that you're going to see is a building just the way it was filmed, but the yellow and red wall on the left was bothering me, and the building behind it too. So I removed all those images and I added the ocean so that the building will seem more isolated, and the rocks on the foreground were shot in a different neighborhood. This neighborhood is Cohimer, a different neighborhood, and then I added the building on the left and the mirror with the car on the bottom left. This is the side of the building, and then I added some debris that I shot in a different neighborhood in the form of an anchor. And the birds that you're going to see flying on the top were there, but they didn't fly at that specific moment. I don't know why the image is stuttering. I don't know why, but this is the wall of the building, and this is a picture I took in an abandoned factory. And then I used the faded Fidel onto the wall of the building. And here in this shot, I did an ellipsis, which is I basically shot the actor again walking on a second shot on the back windows, and then cut that and added it to the first image so that you will see him walking around the building within the same image, and therefore creating a time jump within the same image. This is the stairs, just the way they were shot. And then in another floor, I found a window that I liked, and I reframed the shot so that I would crop the head of the character and create more tension as he goes up. And also you can see a nuclear fallout on the top right, very faded, added to the wall of the building. This shot, I moved it to the left, and that what you will see through the balcony is Havana, but instead of that, we went to shoot the nuclear power plant that we were talking about and added it there. This is shot at home against the black screen, and then through a luminosity filter, I caught the cloth hanging, and I darkened and I added it to this shot on the foreground. And so in a way, this is digital art directing or digital production design, because physically we cannot move the space. This shot was next to a store, so all these other cars I had to remove in Photoshop. So shot by shot, everything has to be manipulated in the computer. This is the hallway, the way it was shot, and this is something I found on a different floor, and also this thing, and I used these two elements to reframe the shot and make it look more ominous, like a cave entrance. And this is the double exposure, because we shoot mostly with natural light. So by doing this, we can have the indoor and the outdoor without having to use light. So basically, you shoot twice the scene with different exposures. And this is one neighborhood, the house I really liked, but the pink building behind was terrible. So instead of that, I used the industrial part of the bay of Havana. And here I added a Communist Party logo behind the lady. And this is a very old technique, basically. You shoot the scene twice without moving the camera, and you place the actor in two different positions, and then you join them by the center. And then on the white square in the center, a painting of the building starts to appear. The character is a painter, and then he draws this image that you see in a different shot. This is the dean's office, and we will never be able to get a permit to shoot in the dean's office, so I use an apartment with the same type of brick. And then we infiltrated the art schools and shot the scene through the window without a permit. This is the ruins of the art school, and then I remove all the trees on the back. And what you see now is an industrial view of San Miguel del Padrón, which is a different neighborhood. I didn't want any green in the film, so all the grass was turned to a brownish color, and all the vegetation is removed completely. And the geography is dislocated in every scene. There's only 2 cups here, so basically I multiply them, and I remove the plants on the right. Here I changed the color of the grass as well. I added a 4th cup, and then the oil refinery and the helicopter and the cloudy sky later. This is in Old Havana, and I shot a different shot from a different roof, which has the boot of another character, and they're both, all these 2 locations are mixed here. The red from the bus, from the car, from the woman's pants, and from the man's hat were gone here as well, and they were turned to either blue, gray, or purple. This is shot in Old Havana as well. And in this scene, I was acting, so it was difficult to act and direct at the same time, so I added myself later in post-production. And this was at MoMA. After I showed my previous film, I told the audience to please collaborate for the new scene of the new movie. So the actor got in the podium, and we did it in 5 minutes. This is a big problem in independent cinema, having extras, so there's one way to solve it. This is in Hershey, a town that is 100 years old in Cuba, and there was a train passing just outside the house, but you couldn't see it because of the light difference. But through the double exposure, you can now see the train passing. A mirror, if you film it up front, of course, you will see the reflection of the camera. So I shot what the mirror will be reflecting, and then I reframe it and place it inside, and then added hair on the foreground, shot against the widescreen, and then that reinforces the subjective point of view without having to resort to the usual handheld camera, which I didn't want to. A hospital scene, it's impossible to get a permit, and even more so if you're censored, like it is my case. So I snuck into a hospital and took pictures of the x-ray, and there wasn't even a table. The table that is going to be used in this scene is also a still picture that I stole from a real hospital, and then I added it to the scene. And these are 4 locations. This is La Loma del Burro. Here the wall is La Víbora Park. This is Centro Habana on the left, and on the right is Centro Habana also, and the clouds were filmed in Vedado. All different neighborhoods of Havana. Here, this is a very centric space. So I replaced the ad and replaced it with a character from the film. The television studios, there was a scene where they assault the television studio. So of course we didn't have access to that roof. So we shot the characters in a different location and then cut them and add them there. I also changed the color of the building to blue. And well, anyway, I mean, it's a lot longer because it's shot by so we can stop the video. But the idea, well, the subject matter of this film, Fidel Castro making an experiment to build a new man, automatically it will not be supported by any institutions to get funding in Cuba or even foreign institutions that have ties to the Cuban government. So I knew that, like with my other films, I had to just go in a guerrilla style and do it. There was no other way. Because I always felt that if you're going to make independent films, you really have to be independent, not in the sense that you finance it from your pocket, but you have to go to the most uncomfortable part of your society. And I think that's your duty as an independent filmmaker. And being independent in form and content to me is the most important. To have time to experiment and to turn your camera into an extension of your arm, pretty much like the pen is to the writer in that sense. And time making up for what you lack in budget until things turn out the way you want to. But that's why I'm always interested in characters that one way or another are misfits, that don't fit in society, because through them they're hypersensitive to what's wrong in any society of the world, and through them you can analyze that society and in a more critical way.
Well, thank you, Miguel. I think that was a fascinating example, like a master class of how can you build a dystopian world in a film with practically no budget, just using imagination and all the resources you have, and also of how you can get away with filming in a dystopian country, in a totalitarian country where you are a censored artist and you are prosecuted, and you can get away with filming and building a different world in there. So I would like to hear now from Rafael Ramírez. Um, I think Rafael has in his films you can like access like to a strange, even metaphysical dimension of what it's like to be in Cuba. I think it's like your films do what a medium does. It communicates with the dead, with the ghosts that are inside the country. And it's kind of, I think it's a dystopian vision in the way of language, cinematic language, and how you mix that with the oral sense and with the language itself, as in Las Campañas de Invierno, which is a film concerned with language itself as an idea to escape even reality, escape the reality of Cuba through a video game, through these Napoleon campaigns that you use, and you have films that go back to the Soviet imaginary, like Diario de la Niebla, Diary of the Mist, and Alona, to the dystopias of the 80s. So I want to hear from Rafael now. How do you see the dystopian aspect in your work?
Well, thank you for being here. Well, for me, the dystopian world actually have a problem. It's like a defense we create in order to say, oh, the utopia failed, so let's call this dystopia. History is just an utopia that failed. So what happened is that if you read the three main texts of Utopia, no? Thomas More, Utopia, City of the Sun by Campanella, and New Atlantis by Bacon, you see that first of all are in islands, or the other one is in the sun, or even City of God. You will read that they're always in contained spaces. You not necessarily go to a world that is an utopia. They go to small spaces where the things have more possibilities of working better. But for me, this is the general notion we have. When we go to these texts, are very weird texts and very complex texts. For me, the best is New Atlantis by Bacon. And what New Atlantis is depicting is a lost island where the people arrive and have a kind of society in there, where actually you have a kind of beginning of cinema inside there. They have a machine that reproduces in a way a kind of cinema or a kind of early phonograph. So the medium is already in the utopia. So the possibility of registering the world is inscribed in the fact of living in an utopian society, whatever it is. And for me, we live, of course, in a society that tried to achieve the utopia. Different societies have tried to do that in every sense, because also the Americans try to live in an utopian also. So it obeys to different orders. The Chinese try to live in an utopia. Gandhi tried to build an utopia with different approach. Of course, the The problem is when you detach from reality in this search of improvement, let's say. But actually, the idea of utopia is forcing you to deal with archetypes all the time, you know, with the men, with the women, with the father, with the family, with the land. Um, the French have this la terre et le mort, no? The land and the dead. So it's a very strong thing that attaches you to the ground in a way. It's like this alchemic diagram with the guy with one hand in the ground and one hand in the sky. It all is very attractive, but when you go to realpolitik, let's say, the things start to fall apart. In my case, I came from the eastern part of the country. My family is not wealthy. I'm not a wealthy person either. So my view on all this system, I believe that everything is connected in a way or another. So I can talk about what represents for me the Russian campaign of Napoleon from my hometown to the destiny of my hometown. And now this movie that is projecting there has become prophetic of the war in Ukraine. And I did that in 2017. And I was seeing the movie now. I said, this is like a destiny manifesto of the war in Ukraine right now, the text of the movie, completely. Because operating a reading of my thesis at the moment when I was shooting the movie that is in my hometown with people that are playing a video game, and this video game away contaminates reality, and these people are like absorbed by the video game. What was happening is that my thesis at the moment, or my idea of how the movie was moving around was, okay, the French spirit, the reason, the idea of reason with the French Revolution collapsed when it battles with the Russian soul, with the irrational. And this will save you from imagine if Napoleon conquered Russia, we will live in a kind of new fascist society from the 19th century on. I am exaggerating. But this was the thesis of the movie. That's why the Battle of Borodino became a key point in that movie. But later on, the voice that is accompanying these images, no, after the war and after a long time, and after my life moved a long time ago, now this voice looks like malevolent to me. It's like a trap. Like I was believing like this voice is like the goodness, this voice that is persuading me. But I was hearing the voice of the history with capital H. No? So in a way, the issue of being living into this peculiar society we are living condemns you in a way, or is the things as they are in a way, you know. I don't want to re-victimize or being the victim or have this speech of, you know, I'm okay. Sometimes my family don't have nothing to eat. I don't have nothing to eat in the 90s. We were starving. I was not just the blockade of the Americans, okay? But if you make all your life a huge complaint about that, also this is a big problem because this is an ultimate victory because the complaint leads to silence. And as Coyula was saying, he has to produce voice and produce words and produce images. So in that way, for me, I was born in the 80s and we grew up. Uh, my first book, my most loved book was Nikolai Gogol, horror stories from the Carpathians. I grew up reading that, not Jose Marti. All the great Cuban writers mean nothing to me in the way of the cherished things, you know? I was reading uh, Orlando Furioso. My father was reading to me Orlando Furioso by Ludovico Ariosto. This was my childhood. So there are a lot of things in the Cuban society that are very cherished for one people that for me are very distant, and other ones that the people are not looking at them and for me are extremely valuable. And from then emerged a cinema that in a way, of course, became political because what the institutions want of you is not just that an image of Cuba as an utopian thing, but also the ironically what happened with the revolutionary cinema after the 60s in a way is that they reproduce stereotypes that were already in the years before the revolution. So in the 90s you have a lot of comedies where the black people are the sexiest, everybody dance, everybody's happy in the ruins. You know, it's the same if you see the movies of, I don't know, the comedies of the 50s in a way. They were using again this kind of racist approach to a very complex reality. I'm not saying that the comedies are bad at all, but it's worrying when all the money of the state cinema goes to produce these ridiculous and offensive films. Um, this is one part of the aspect of things in general, but for me, I read Cuba, and I'm living from 2 years in Athens. I'm coming and going to Cuba, and it's a crazy experience because it just opened my mind in a region that Benitez Rojo was calling the Meta Archipelago. So a notion that, for me at least, helped me to understand a lot of concepts that were like disintegrated in this kind of exploration of the reality. Because what I'm doing is not science fiction; is in a way a kind of anthropological or philosophical inquiries. It gives the chance that I'm using the film for that, but I could be writing, I could be translating, I compose music. These are ways to interrogate this reality I have. And another thing that is crazy is that if you see all our films, looks like a devastated land, no? Of course, if you go there, you will see a devastated land. But in this devastated land is the common land for me. I don't see, it's crazy the idea of poverty and ruins, how are perceived. When you live in the ruins, you know that you are in a ruin, but it's your house. So it's your house that is a ruin. It's not that you are happy with that, but you learn how to look at how to live inside the ruins, and this creates a grammar. And for me, this is precious because you learn to build your own system of dealing the images that are around you, like a kind of editing these images. That's why Coyula's system, that is the complete opposite of mine, is fascinating for me, because what I do is that I never move a chair. I get to a place and I don't move a table in the place. I try to shoot according to what is in the place. And the story is completely fantastic. But I love the idea that Coyula is creating landscapes that don't exist at all. It's fragments of different landscape, and it's a new landscape. So are ruins upon ruins. Um, for me, this has created a kind of a style also. If you see, all our movies are like inhabiting a same kind of territory. Probably are difficult movies. Probably for some people will be tragic movies, or you won't laugh, maybe, in some of them, yes. But for me, it's a cinema that is occupying a space that was completely forgotten from the main eye of the power, from the representation of the power. It's not an easy cinema. We don't do things for you to feel well. And these works are also the idea of audience. I think at opera is a little bit similar with us, because we are first dealing with doing the film. This is an enough huge problem as to be thinking also in the audience. Just to make the film is so difficult that you have to put all of yourself in there, because you know that maybe you won't be able to do another one. So you should, like, if it was the last film you're going to do, not because you are going to be killed or go to jail, which is the case to some people go to jail, but just because maybe economically you won't be able to do it anymore. So that's why every of these works you will see are sometimes very charged, sometimes are baroque. That is a thing that goes in our soul from the 19th century, the baroque tendency of producing images. So even if you have the films like La Piscina, there is a minimal film, but it's dense in significations. It's not that it's minimal and there is happening nothing and you're just contemplating an emptiness. So this has mobilized a style that is also a rhetoric, because everything is rhetoric. The interesting thing for me is that now there is a generation that is living outside Cuba or going between outside and inside, and also a generation that is living in the inland of Cuba, in the eastern part of Cuba, where I come from, and was very difficult to find filmmakers there. And we have Carlos Melian, which is a remarkable filmmaker that is doing all his things in Santiago de Cuba. I was doing all my work the most detached possible from Havana, because inside Cuba you have a lot of dynamics also in this cinema you are seeing here, because it's a cinema also that have this cut that is also the social class. In Cuba you have social classes, like in every place. So you have people that have access to certain things and people that don't have access to the things. But mysteriously, they operate in the same region of things. You can be more wealthy and maybe travel abroad, since you have, the first time I went abroad was to Locarno when I have 34 years old. I was praying that the plane won't fall down to the earth. And and for me, the fact of even of traveling is full of fear and full of demanding things. You know, I'm afraid of taking an elevator, for instance. You know, this looks like crazy, but it's like that. So you get lost very easily. Your memory of places is it's not operative. And this goes to my cinema directly. The characters are lost in translation always, you know. So they are trying to rewrite the reality continuously. And for ending my intervention, I would say my movie starts with a short story of Kafka, which is called The Hunter Gracchus. And the story of the hunter Gracchus is this hunter that goes in a boat for eternity, and he arrives to certain towns, and nobody wants him here because he's a bad omen. You know, they want to get rid of this hunter as soon as possible, but the hunter remains. And it's a short story that never Kafka ends. Have two versions, he left it like that. Just in the attempt of the mayor of Riga trying to get rid of this terrible host, this guy that came to his house, this kind of ghost that we want to expel. And my condition when I go outside Cuba is that, because everybody's talking Che Guevara, Cuba, I went there, the woman, the dancing, Buena Vista Social Club, and you are the hunter Gracchus. You are that presence of that hunter in the Black Forest that fell down for a cliff hunting a gazelle, and he is in a middle term between death and life. And you have the duty to say something to these people in a way that won't be destructive. And that's what Gracchus tried to create, like a tongue to explain these things. And these are my films, are this tongue. I probably won't tell you about the tragedies of Cuba, or I will try to destroy your dreams about how beautiful is that tropical paradise. I will say see my films, see our films, because are more complex than whatever we are going to be saying here today, and are probably more free than what we are able to articulate. That's the wonder of art. So this is what I have to say.
Thank you, Rafa. And yeah, to follow on the theme, I was thinking about this theme of ruins and what Antonio Jose Ponte, a Cuban writer, calls ruinología, ruinology, which is not only in Cuban contemporary cinema, but also literature, art in general, the art of the ruins, the new art of making ruins, which is also a writing by Ponte. And to follow the theme of ruinology and to use these spaces and the power of expression they had in order to articulate some notions, some ideas about Cuba. I want to talk now with Alejandro Alonso, and I think the theme of disintegration is very powerful in your work, because I was thinking about home, for example, which is the idea of to disintegrate the notion of a country, the notion of what a nation is, and also in Terranova, the notion of the city, of Havana, of the capital, of all the cliche representations of what that city is. And your film kind of deconstructs all of that, and El Proyecto is very, I think is I don't know how to put it, is very articulate in the way it talks about the failure of the social project in Cuba by using the pretext of talking about the disintegration of this place where the education, the indoctrination took place, which is the school in the countryside where these people went in order to become the new man. And well, and El Proyecto has specifically more dystopian elements in its visuals, in its iconography. So I want to hear from Alejandro now, and he will be translated by Maria.
Sí, sorry, I'm speaking in Spanish. Yo creo que somos y ahí están las películas, somos ese resultado, ¿no? Al final somos ese hombre nuevo, ese experimento fallido, y creo que nuestras películas...
I think that you can see that in our movies, that we are the new men, we are that failure, that failed experiment.
Y esa sensación de que hay algo roto, algo que no se concretó, algo que no llegó a ese lugar al que se aspiraba,
And that feeling that there is something broken, that we didn't get to that place that we were trying to get.
se condensa más en ideas que en espacios, ¿no?
You can see it more in the ideas than in the spaces.
Y ahí entonces, bueno, es donde está esa diferencia, creo que puede haber entre nuestras películas y esas otras películas que muestran una distopía más pornográfica, digamos.
And that's the place where you can see the difference between our movies and the movies that present more, what did you say?
Una distopía más pornográfica.
More
más-
pornographic dystopia.
Y creo que al ser uno entonces el que carga con ese fallo, con ese rol, es un error que se puede, que es transportable fuera de la isla.
And to be the ones that carry with this failure is something that we carry with us outside of the island.
Y creo que eso se empezará a condensar, y bueno, tengo esa impresión, con toda esta nueva generación que está saliendo de Cuba.
And I think this will be articulated in this new generation of filmmakers that are outside of Cuba.
Y que bueno, en mi caso lo siento así, que aunque viva en España ahora, voy a seguir construyendo ese espacio y esas ideas desde ese rol, desde ese fallo, ¿no?
And this is me, that I am living in Madrid, and I am still building my ideas from that space of failure.
Y también, bueno, creo que eso ha condicionado una manera de encontrar un lenguaje, ¿no?
I think that has conditioned the idea of building a language,
Una manera de mirar,
a way of looking at things.
que la paradoja está en que en mi caso hago documentales,
Then the paradox is that in my case, I make documentary films.
que muchas veces, bueno, dicen, bueno, la hibridación llega como algo forzado y yo creo que no, que llega como algo natural.
And sometimes these hybrid projects can be seen as something forced, but in my case, it is something very natural.
Porque en Cuba, como sucede en otros lugares, pero creo de una manera mucho más alterada,
Because in Cuba, as I think it happens in many places, but it happens in a more altered way,
uno tiene mucha conciencia de que vive en una gran ficción, ¿no?
we have a lot of conscious about the fiction we're living in.
Donde, digamos, la realidad y lo que nos dicen o lo que se aspiraba
In which the reality of what we were told or what we are aspired to
ha quedado completamente desincronizada, ¿no?
has been completely unsynchronized, out of sync. Yes.
Y bueno, en películas como Home o Terranova uno intenta llevar eso un poco más allá y generar entonces espacios imaginarios.
In cases like, okay, in case, is this okay? No.
Se fue.
Ah, okay. No, fea. ¿Ya? Are we good? ¿Qué dijiste otra vez, Ale?
Que tanto en Home como en Terranova se intenta llevar eso a otro nivel
In Home and in Terra Nova, I try to take that to another level.
y aunque trabajemos directamente con la realidad y con material de archivo real,
And even though we work with real material and archival material,
hay un intento por alterar eso y generar una nueva narrativa.
there is an attempt to generate a new narrative.
Sí, eso. No sé si...
Yeah, I think that now all of us have said, I think a lot of what makes every poetic unique and what makes every poetic similar to each other. So I think it would be good to hear from you. If you want to ask us in general or in particular something about Cuban contemporary cinema, the dystopian view of the country, you can have the mic, an open mic, and we'll take your questions. So anybody has one? No one? Don't be shy. Well, I think if it does happen, it's because you have one.
is living, of you 4 or 5, in Cuba? Only you. And the others are living in Madrid, outside Cuba.
Yeah.
You live in Cuba as well. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. I think your situation is very, very, very difficult. I was doing a project in Cuba, and I always was controlled in everything, and there was no one step, not even at night, where I was not controlled. I had a secretary, but she was not really a secretary. She was the woman who was suspecting me. And if I wanted to go to Holguin, this was in Holguin, and I lived in that hotel outside, she was quite nervous. She said, "No, you can never go into the city, not without me." So you see, I understand your situation, and you were talking of that kind of guerrilla activity, and this is very difficult. This is even more. It's a private dystopian, and even dystopian square, even.
Thank you.
Yeah, to comment on that, actually, yes, it's very difficult because, for example, in my case, with a film I did in 2017, we had a police raid when we tried to screen it, not at a movie theater owned by the state, but at a private home, because we announced it on Facebook. And it was impossible display of police resources, police cars blocking the two sides of the street so that a group of 20 people won't be able to reach one person's living room. So, so in my case, I need to operate. I don't have a 24-hour surveillance, but the state security does collateral damage. They intimidate my actors. Actually, a few actors walked out of my movie because they were directly intimidated or they self-censored themselves. And those obstacles that Carlos were talking about is something you have to weave into the narrative of the film all the time. So you have to be hyper concentrated on, and in my case, because I'm the cinematographer, the editor, the writer, and the director, I just don't want to spend almost any time in real life. I mean, like, we go out to buy food, and we buy food for 1 month so that we don't have to go out and worry about that again. And when we go out to film, which is just me and my partner, Lynn Cruz, who's not here right now, but basically we do when we approach an actor, instead of using a cell phone, we just go to meet that actor, so that in case the cell phone is being read, there's no, and we just go out and do it, that's why it's hard to keep surveillance. I mean, that we have to put somebody on our door 24 hours, and right now I think they have bigger problems than artists. After the July 11th uprising, they realized the artists were not only the problem, but the population was at a level of discontent that it is more important for them right now.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment or what, but anyway, hopefully you can respond to what I say. Firstly, it was great to fall upon this talk today while visiting Kassel to see Documenta, and I'm very underinformed about Cuban cinema, especially contemporary Cuban cinema. So, of course, it's a privilege for me and for everybody here. And I suppose I'm somebody who also makes films. So my comment is more. It's sort of based in an affinity for you as filmmakers, and I wonder. On the one hand, I'm aware, with a situation like this where you're talking about Cuban cinema, that there's, I mean, the packaging of this situation as Cuban cinema, of course, allows it to happen and allows us all to be here, and that's valuable. And at the same time, there's also, I sense, there's a way in which there's also a type of essentializing of what Cuban cinema is, right? and these talks, and when you bring people together on the basis of nationality, right? There's a way in which actually there's a sense of trying to look for similarities or affinities, and there's a type of reductiveness in sometimes to these situations. And I understand, I'm from a smaller country as well, I understand the kind of complexities of those situations, but I suppose I'm just interested to hear you as individuals maybe talk about maybe a sense of like the burden of representation, of carrying the representation, of being Cuban always as filmmakers. And if there's times in which you also try to withdraw from being Cuban as filmmakers.
Well, you're right, because every time you make an act of curation or curating something means excluding things also. And for instance, it will be very interesting to project all the Cuban comedies of the 90s in Kassel. You will see a lot of people laughing and a lot of migrants offended when they see a black woman being treated like a prostitute like this, and slapping in the face somebody, or a Spanish guy that comes to a Cuban family and becomes like the lord of the land. And at the end, everybody's so happy, you know. It's like this commonplace of the Cuban laugh of his disgraces, no? So for me, it's a very offended, you know, but in any case, it's interesting to see what happened with the other people. I'm just here putting an idea, no? But you put an interesting thing in there. I want to make a little digression in the sense just to have an idea of how subtle the scenes are, because Coyula is putting an extreme case where he's being chased, his actors have been menaced, or is doing under big pressure his film. It's not my case. For instance, I don't have any support from the CAI, but I have support sometimes from one institution, from the other, from another friends. So, but at the same time, I'm never using permits to shoot, no? So the police can go and get you in a way. But this situation just worsened, because now if you are not a member of a kind of organism they created that give you a ID card, so you are a member of that, is now it's a crime. You can receive punishment for shooting without being part of this. And this have also a commission that decides who is a filmmaker and who is not. This happened with the music. Imagine, we have a national commission that goes to every province of the country evaluating the musicians. And they say to my father, you are A, you have A plus because you are a good piano player. But if you commit a mistake, you're a B, so your salary is lesser. If you don't go to this process, you will never get paid. I was directing an orchestra of 12 people playing free jazz, experimental music, and what happened? Of course, we were never musicians in the eyes of this institution. So this means that these 12 wonderful people, I told them, let's stop this. You need to earn your bread and start playing the shitty Cuban music the tourists love and go to the hotels to earn a living. But we were playing 3 years for free, you know, whatever we love. But it was impossible to get, and there were people that want to hire us to, okay, come and play, and was illegal. And this is, I saw in this terrible day of the evaluation, I saw people crying with 60 years old that just they were out of tune singing, and they said, no, you are devaluated. You have to ask for the, you know, so he won't get a salary anymore. So it works like this. So if the base is that, imagine the degrees of difficulty to do this kind of work. And the interesting thing is that also there is a transnational cinema here, what is happening all over the world. But Cuba is behind all of this, because if you see the big venues, they discover suddenly the new, I don't know, the new Indonesian cinema, for instance, no? But for the Cuban cinema, it's very difficult because you have the 60s that overshadow everything else, but you have a lot of people like Miñuca, Fernando here, that were great filmmakers. They went outside Cuba and made films that don't belong to the Cuban tradition, but at the same time are made by Cubans. So what do you do with these films of these two people? Burn it in the stake, forgotten, and here are exposed. This is the place for these films, because don't belong to a grammar that we can be agree with that or disagree with that, but it's very strong. It's like in Germany happened with the new German cinema, fast being there of these people, and suddenly in Oberhausen appears this new generation of filmmakers that said, okay, this new German cinema is, we have to do this kind of approach to cinema. It's the same in Cuba. It's come from for wave. So this is a kind of wave. There are people now that are more younger than us doing things for YouTube, YouTubers that have like serial killer stories or monster things or genre stuff. And this uncharted territory is coming after us. So we are old now. But we want to guarantee a space for these people to exist because the institution don't want them neither. So we have to start doing these approaches to the world outside. Imagine I have a dialogue with one of the best Latin American critics alive. I won't say his name. And he told me, Cuban cinema, yes, great in the 60s, and they have one great director after the 2000s. I said, but this guy won in Rotterdam last year. This guy, I don't know, is he killed in Sundance? I don't know. This guy now win in New York Film Independent Film Festival. So you have the friends around, but they just don't want to go there because are difficult to see these films because don't fall into the idea of the left in Latin America. You know, are not talking any long about the utopia, about the blind commitment, about things that in the 60s were necessary indeed in this kind of fight, but are not operative in this way anymore. So that's why it's a very, for me, it's a passion territory now because it's very contradictory. For the first time, you can have argues openly, things that this was impossible in Cuba to make. Because a lot of us maybe will be excluded automatically. They will say, Coyula cannot be there. You can have the meeting, but and maybe other people that were in digital here because they weren't able to come, they won't be in Cuba at all. So this is one exercise on a kind of free speech and a kind of free criticism also and free curatorship. So for me, it's the first attempt, have a lot of effects, will be opening in the future, I hope. Somebody.
I have a short question, and please want a short answer if this is possible. Do you always want to be filmmakers, or you think of doing something different?
Sí, yes. You know, if when you make films, you get fun. You know, for me, films is really nice because you avoid things with fiction. So, in my case, no, I use it all the time, from since I was a child. You know, so fiction it's like a shelters. No, it's like a shelter in which you put ideas that you want to share, and that's it. It's like, well, it's really nice. But I think you could do that with everything, you know. We yesterday, for example, we met each other and we said, well, we should make a picnic today, you know. So we will go and we will make our picnic in a few hours, and this is for me that has the same importance that the film, because it's not because you have to produce a film as you produce a picnic. It's just because you are there and you share things, and it's about that. Well, at least from my way of understanding. So, since I moved to Spain, I start to work. I start to explore with visual arts because when I was in college, I started doing that, and I realized I was very impulsive, no, and I just do things rapidly. And in that time, you know, in that school, it was like you need to be a printer, no, like Rachel Carrion, the painter that drew the magnificent drawings that are inside of that. So I quit of that, and and Miguel was shooting in that time. I see him with a camera and said, "Oh, I like this. You know, you could build your own world with this." So I would go in that direction. So but I think any art, at least for me, give me a lot. No, it's therapy. Is really good because you create something that doesn't exist before. Is I really like that, and it's really nice that we are a glitch for the system. We are beautiful glitches, and it's it's why not? We have to continue doing that. If we were a code, we were a bot, but there are beautiful bots. Right now, we are away from the machines because machines are bad because all the literature and machine will lead us to the end of the world, but will be our friends too. In a few years, probably here in Documenta, they will show a lot of art that are made by humans and machines, and well, probably I get lost again, but it's art is a fertile landscape, and it's about that. If that's what I think.
Well, to me, it happened that I started making films by accident because I was drawing comic books when I was in high school, and I was also writing short stories on a typewriter because I didn't have a computer, and I wrote a novel in 1999. And then my dad went to travel to the U.S. to visit my family who had left in 1959, my aunt, and they gave him a VHS camera. And when he brought that back, I realized I could combine the literature and the visual storytelling. And for me, it was, at least to date, the best way I have to express myself. So I will continue. I mean, for example, I'm fascinated by what video games could be. I think they haven't reached the possibility of being an art form yet because of the industry and all the money behind it. But the branching storylines has always fascinated me. And I think it will get there at some point, but maybe I'm too old to. I don't know enough about programming to do that, but it's something that would be amazing.
There was another question, right?
Yeah. The question was about whether, especially the people, or those of you who don't live in Cuba anymore, if you think you will always make films about Cuba, just kind of also thinking about this burden of representation, whether you kind of anticipate that maybe at some point your view or your memory of Cuba will go another direction, maybe from the people who are still there. And also maybe it's already the case or not, because I don't know if the majority of the people support the ideas that you have or they're against it maybe. So then, yeah.
No es. Es un tema interesante porque creo que parte de esa reinvención que tiene que hacer uno cuando sale de la isla es también...
It's an interesting subject because part of the invention that we have to make after leaving the island,
Bueno, dejar sedimentar esas experiencias
it's like letting those experiences like fall and make some sort of sediment.
y que aunque no estén directamente luego en la película, aunque filmemos, bueno, ahora estoy preparando una película para filmar en un desierto en España, o sea,
And even though these are not in the actual films, like he's now getting ready to shoot in a desert in Spain,
la isla siempre va a salir, ¿no?
the island's always there.
Y uno trabaja sobre esa base de memorias, experiencias.
And we work on that base of memory and experience.
Y esa idea de cierta descolocación, que al menos yo que estoy, bueno, me he ido hace muy poco de la isla.
And this idea of being out of place, because I left very soon, like very recently, I left the island.
Todavía tengo que procesar y entender, y creo que una manera de hacerlo es filmando, ¿no?
And I still need to process and understand, and one way to do that is by shooting, by filming.
Pero bueno, igual está, bueno, la película de Carlos. Ay, lo siento. Iba a decir que tú tienes una película, Carlos, filmado también en Japón, y yo siempre hablo que es una experiencia extraordinaria.
Yeah, Carlos shooting in Japan, and he says that it's a very extraordinary experience.
Que aunque está filmada en las antípodas de la isla, es una película muy cubana, ¿no?
That even though it's so far away from the island, it's still a very Cuban film.
Pero hay una trampa y es donde creo que hay un territorio por explorar para nosotros.
And I think there is a trap, and it's a territory for us to explore.
y es el tema de los soportes y las ayudas para hacer un cine cubano fuera de la isla.
And it's the theme of supports and help to produce Cuban cinema outside of
Porque una
Cuba.
vez volvemos a este bucle que hablaba Rafa, que el que lee un proyecto sobre un director cubano exiliado espera determinados patrones, ¿no?
Yeah, because projects from exile of Cuban filmmakers are expected to fall into certain patterns.
Y entonces es una trampa, ¿no? Vuelves al mismo punto donde la gente espera del director exiliado cubano que cuente lo que ellos esperan que cuente, ¿no?
So you get to the same point in which you are expected to tell the stories that the Cuban exiles are supposed to tell.
Sí, 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 sí. Well, I remember when I was in London that you could go to a bookstore and there was books where it says, get rid of your accent, you know, how to get rid of your accent. And it's impossible to get rid of your, well, accent, and it's impossible to get rid of your identity. I think what we will do, or I like to do, it's, you know, to turn in some kind of octopus, and the core still be Cuban. It's impossible to change it because it's like a bottle of wine. You could, you know, throw it, but at the end there is some space of liquid that is there. It's impossible to, you know, to throw it out. So it's like to, you know, to connect that with different, you know, way of understanding. For example, in the case of Japan, it was, well, super risky and an adventure, and I was in a school because between a Japanese and a Cuban, there was like 3 worlds in the middle. No, it's like at the same time, we are the same in some way because we both came from an island. We both are clans. We are a recent clan. They are a millionaire clan. For us, it was really difficult to really share how we are with foreigners. We need to learn how to do it, how to talk about us. No, they don't know how to do it. You know, in the case of Japan, it was really, they know how to do it, but well, they are super closed, and it's tricky, no? So, well, I get lost again, and it's, you know, it's about connect things. You know, in my case, I like Eastern European countries a lot because in some ways, like see in a crystal ball the future of Cuba. You know, with different shades, with different features, but the core is there. No, so it's now I'm writing a lot and I'm trying to connect with that. You know, because it's like to make a. It would be nice to make. I like to do some kind of crossing communism. You know, which is mix all those experiences, because it's really nice the ¿cómo se diría? No contacto. It's really nice the connection between fiction and power. No, it's like, I really like that. It's like in our country, you know, the government took us the country, but they gave us the fiction. So when you talk about, I will go to the desert and I will want to make a film in the desert, and probably there were some Cuban aspect that will arise there in the desert. No, that desert is Cuba. It's like Pasolini, you know, and he did it 30 years ago. You know, this is Athens right now, and that's it, you know. And I think what we should achieve is that freedom, you know. It's about freedom. We could do everything. Why not? You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say that what is Cuba anymore? That's the thesis, I think, of Home, the film by Alejandro. We need to start thinking about the possible Cubas that are outside of Cuba. And fact, it's a fact that 3 million Cubans live outside of Cuba. So what is Cuba anymore? It's a scattered notion. It's a fragmented place. It's more of an abstraction of an idea. So why can you not talk about Cuba in a desert, in a frozen tundra, in a soundstage? So Cuba is whatever you want it to be, in Miami or in Madrid. So it's the idea of the reinvention of this notion of country in the outer space even. So because we always carry that burden of identity and that burden of memory. So I think, as Carlos says, that give us so much freedom for the future, because we can now reinvent the country. The thing we cannot do in reality, we can do it in our cinema. We can reinvent what the notion of Cuba can really be. So I don't know if you have or no, another questions, or I think we've been talking for an hour and a half, or maybe, but I think, well, thank you for being here. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you for the questions and the attention. Thank you to Carlos, Rafael, Miguel, and Alejandro, and Maria for the translation. And just as Rafa said, watch the films, because they are more complex and more suggestive than whatever we can say here. Watch the winter campaigns, watch the Project of the Century, watch Blue Heart, watch El Proyecto, the project, and watch all the Cuban cinema you have. That is the alternative, so of the classic cinema, in order to have a more nuanced version of the country. So the what? Well, the activity of tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Of course, tomorrow we have a workshop that starts tomorrow with Alejandro Alonso for 3 days. You can. It's called Disappearing Territories, and for 2 or 3 days, let's see. And it's a workshop about his work, about his methods of this kind of documentary portrayal of reality in Cuba in a very different way, in a more in a way that crosses with fiction also, with manipulation. So it's very interesting. It starts at 11 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, 2 hours. If you can come tomorrow for the starting of the workshop also, you are invited. So thank you again for being here. Thank you to INSTAR, to Tania, to Documenta. And yes, just watch Cuban cinema. Thank you.